Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday.
Outnumbered starts right now.
Fox News alert, the U.S. Supreme Court hearing arguments for the very first time today on President Trump's travel ban. The administration is arguing the courts have no role to play in this because the president has broad powers over immigration and national security. Critics argue the ban discriminates against Muslims. Now it is up to the justices to decide, and we are on it. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Sandra Smith, host of After the Bell on Fox Business, Melissa Francis, former deputy spokesperson for the State Department, and Fox News analyst Marie Harf. And joining us in the center seat, ready to go, Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. He's outnumbered, and I've heard in certain circles, dinner parties and whatnot, why is he not on the Supreme Court? So I'm glad you're here. And you're probably wondering who I eat with. Yeah, so let's get to it.
I'm happy to be here.
You ready?
Yes.
All right. A big day at the Supreme Court, as I mentioned. The justices hearing arguments for the first time on President Trump's travel ban. The policy has been in effect since December. The Trump administration is asking the court to reverse lower court rulings striking down the ban. But this is the first time the justices are considering whether it violates immigration law or the U.S. Constitution. The ban applies to travelers from 5 countries with mostly Muslim populations: Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, Yemen. You'll notice a few of those don't have stable environments. It also affects 2 non-Muslim countries, North Korea and Venezuela. Fox News at Night's Shannon Bream is live outside the Supreme Court with more on this. Shannon.
Hi, Harris. Well, yeah, I just stepped out as they wrapped up arguments a short time ago on this rainy day. Crowds out here chanting on both sides of this very heated issue. A lot of the conversation, at least in the beginning of the case, was about congressional power versus presidential power. A number of the justices saying, listen, Congress has acted on this. They have drafted statutes about immigration, about vetting. Justice Sotomayor in particular saying, what gives the president power to go beyond that, to add to that, to do something that Congress has already spoken to? She was one of the very toughest questioners for the government as it tries to prop up the administration's proclamation here. This is the 3rd version of it. Countries have come and gone from the list. They say this one now is completely neutral on its face. Well, as you imagine, there are several skeptics of that. A number of the lower court judges have talked about the president's statements when he was a candidate and also as president. They've talked about his tweets and retweets of controversial topics that they say prove he's got an animus against Muslim people, that this is a so-called Muslim ban. And there was conversation today about whether or not those things should be considered in this case. Justice Alito at one point saying, if we're calling it a so-called Muslim ban, how can that be when it only impacts 8% of the world's Muslim population, saying there are other countries that are much more populated by Muslims, have a much larger number of people, and they're not impacted by this. He said, listen, it's targeted and it looks like it is aimed at things beyond religion that strictly have to do with countries that are unstable, that are not providing full vetting information to the U.S. so they can decide when somebody shows up at our borders whether or not they should be permitted to this country and whether that can be done safely. There was a conversation at one point with the Chief Justice asking the plaintiff's attorneys if the president revoked everything he has said about any kind of Muslim ban, anything along those lines, and then the very next day reissued this proclamation, would it be okay with you? Would it pass muster? And he essentially said yes. The Chief Justice asked him again as if he couldn't believe he would concede that point, and he again said yes, but that he also said he still believes, the plaintiffs still believe, there are problems with the ban just based on the text of it, that it still amounts to having a discriminatory purpose, regardless of how or why it was drafted. Harris.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I'm glad you kind of enumerated all that, because then I asked the question about Venezuela, and doesn't stability on the ground matter in terms of the vetting?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one part of the criteria. A number of agencies got involved after the first 2 travel bans hit serious bumps, legal and otherwise. And they said, we're going to have agencies that go to these countries and say, if you can provide us this specific information, then you get off the list. That's happened with Chad. Those other countries remain on there because they're not providing the basic information. The administration says our job is to protect this country. We can't do that if we can't vet the people who are coming here. So there are criteria and ways for people to get off the list. But as you can hear, a very busy day here outside the court. A lot going on. As that discussion continues inside, one really interesting thing today is that they're going to release same-day audio. It hasn't happened since 2015, so a little bit later today we'll be able to give people the chance to hear the justices in their own voice as they heard this case today.
Wow, that's an interesting, and if I happen to miss that, I will be watching at 11 p.m. Eastern for Fox News at Night with Shannon Bream.
Yes. We'll see you then.
Thank you very much. Judge, that's interesting. So same day audio, and that kind of enhances the conversation because a lot of times these things bake for so long and then you're kind of getting everybody else's opinion.
Sometimes the oral arguments in the Supreme Court are in the weeds and the terminology does not appeal to the public. But in a case like this, where you're talking about statements the President of the United States made when he was a candidate, in his official documents as the President, and in his tweets, I think the public will probably find the oral argument very interesting. Let me set up the case for you. The challengers say that the President has manifested a clear and unmistakable bias against Muslims, and his decision is based on that bias, and the First Amendment, which requires total neutrality in matters of religion, makes this unconstitutional. The government says the Congress has given the President the ability to suspend immigration from any country that he finds where the persons coming into the country are more likely than not to be dangerous, and the President is exercising that authority. Those are the two arguments right there.
So where is the intersection of religion? Because you're looking at Venezuela. You're looking at other countries that are not mostly Muslim.
Correct. But Venezuela, here's what Hawaii, the state of Hawaii is the lead plaintiff.
Right.
Person arguing for the plaintiffs is the Obama administration's Solicitor General, chief lawyer before the Supreme Court. So you have the present Solicitor General representing the administration and the former Solicitor General going against each other. Everybody knows each other very well.
Okay.
The argument is that the President added North Korea and Venezuela to the list
countries have come on and off this list.
so as to defeat the Muslim argument. But look, if this is based on religion, then the administration has a serious problem. It doesn't sound as though the justices think that, because the swing vote is Justice Kennedy, who seemed to manifest from his questions this morning a decided preference for presidential authority to do this.
Yemen, Syria, we know what they look like on the ground. Yeah. I don't know that your religion would matter much when you consider the fact that it's difficult to vet anybody from there. I mean, the first question probably wouldn't be about religion.
You know, a lot of people have made a lot of good arguments on both sides, and one of the things that I found compelling was something that Shannon just said when she talked about, you mentioned stability on the ground, and she talked about the idea that invite us to your country, show us what you can do to get off this list, how you can better vet people before they come, because that's our concern. I mean, to me, it seems like that's the fail-safe that would be in place when somebody thinks that they're being wrongly persecuted. And when you look at the countries that are identified, it's hard to imagine them being able to say, here, come here, we'll show you how we're
You don't think
vetting
Iran
things.
would do that?
Well, I mean, it speaks to the question of why then isn't Saudi Arabia on the list if it's a country that is mostly Muslim, but is a lot more stable on the ground.
That was the question I had for the Obama administration, too. And maybe you can answer that, Marie.
Well, so I have a question about why Afghanistan or from a national security perspective, not a constitutional
Saudi Arabia,
perspective.
why not that under the former administration?
Well, we didn't have this ban under the former administration.
But you had Muslim-identified nations.
Yeah,
that
a similar one,
those
but that was
countries
that
were
was a
actually
visa.
imposed on us by Congress. We did not select those countries. So here are the three questions I have. First, from a national security perspective, why not Afghanistan, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, where many more terrorists have actually hurt and killed Americans?
Because Saudi Arabia has a stable government where they're letting us come in and look at the people that are
Afghanistan
coming.
doesn't. Pakistan, it's up in the air. But then I would also say there's a group of 55 former Republican and Democratic national security officials, including some CIA directors, who filed a friend of the court brief with the Supreme Court saying, from a national security perspective, this doesn't make us safer. Again, that's not a constitutional argument, but it's interesting.
They really want to second guess the president on his national security determinations.
Right,
Okay.
right.
So can I ask you, Judge, to put on your political hat for just a second, and you can answer no.
Do I ever wear a political hat, Marie?
I don't know. I've never
It's
seen
got
it.
a chin strap the last time
But
I checked. It's very,
I think you
very
can
nice.
answer this question, because this is, as we can all agree, one of the president's most pressing agenda items. So, like, what is a win-loss here? What does the outcome of this mean for this president's agenda, do you think?
It's a win to the base, a substantial win to the base. The president arguably commenced his campaign on this issue, and he suffered many, many defeats throughout the tortuous route that the three bans, this is the third one, have taken up and down and up and down throughout the judicial system.
Yeah.
If he wins this will speak with finality on whether or not he was right or wrong under the Constitution. Not whether it was right or wrong under national security, not whether it was wise politically, but whether he had the power under the Constitution.
In your opinion, was he?
I would not have signed that ban, but I'm not the president.
All right. I want to go back to something you said, Marie, because I think it's important. So President Obama had a list of terror hotbeds. There were 7 nations. And on that list was not Saudi Arabia. But you're right. It wasn't a ban, but those were the terror hotbeds. And through the State Department, I understood it that Americans were told, according to the research, not to go there.
So we have travel restrictions on a number of countries, many more beyond the 7. And those, again, those terrorist hotbeds were imposed on us. That was a designation imposed on our administration by Congress. And we never would have said people couldn't come here from there. This prevents, people.
I just wanted to make everybody aware that the list was real, but the reason was different.
Exactly. And we didn't come up with the list. And this ban also prevents people coming here to visit family members, seeking medical treatment.
Did you fight the list?
This ban, absolutely, we did. This ban now, where we're talking about in the Trump administration, the ban now prevents people from coming to the U.S. for good reasons, too, which is a problem.
The judge is doing his own research.
Our D.C. team is so good. The audio was out already. They just sent it to us.
Ooh. Yeah, all right, because it's same-day audio.
That's
and I know during the commercial what you will be doing.
It's almost real-time
That judge
audio.
stuff that you do. Going through the arguments from the U.S. Supreme Court. It's great to watch, by the way. New information about the Columbia University law professor who passed former FBI Director James Comey's memos to the media. Sometimes the verb leaked is used. Turns out he also worked as special government employee for the FBI. Why we're only learning about this now and the potential effect of these latest revelations ahead. And the White House is stepping up its support for VA nominee Dr. Ronny Jackson as we get more information about allegations which could threaten his confirmation.
I just think it's unfortunate that what we're seeing in these confirmation processes are these very qualified, honorable individuals being dragged through the mud. That needs to stop. Let Dr. Jackson have his hearing.
The White House rallying behind President Trump's pick to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs, Ronny Jackson. Just yesterday, senators delaying his confirmation hearing indefinitely over multiple misconduct allegations. President Trump slamming Democrats over attempts to block his nominees. The president saying they tried to block his Secretary of State pick. And now this.
This is a vicious group of people that malign, and they do, and I lived through it. We all lived through it. They failed with Mike Pompeo, and that was a big, big hit because they thought they could stop him and embarrass. The Democrats have become obstructionists. That's all they're good at.
And last night, White House Strategic Communications Director Mercedes Schlapp dismissing the accusations against Jackson.
I mean, these are false allegations. Let's just start from there. I mean, I just think it's unfortunate that what we're seeing in these confirmation processes are these very qualified, honorable individuals being dragged through the mud. That needs to stop. Let Dr. Jackson have his hearing.
But lawmakers say they must do their due diligence before Jackson's hearing. The ranking Democrat on the Veterans Affairs Committee, John Tester, detailed allegations that Dr. Jackson drank on the job during the previous administration.
It was the Obama administration, and the truth is that the Admiral Jackson was the primary health care provider for the president. And if you're drunk and something happens with the president, it's very difficult to go in and treat the president how it needs to be done. So this is totally unacceptable under this environment, and that's what multiple people told us this was the case on several different trips.
Despite that account, President Obama routinely gave Jackson a glowing praise on a performance review back in October 2016. Then President Obama wrote this: Ronny's positive impact cannot be overstated. He is a tremendous asset to the entire White House team, already at a level of performance and responsibility that far exceeds his current rank. Promote to Rear Admiral now. That was then President Obama. This is a tough one, and interesting to hear the White House response there. Already dismissing allegations, and many senators, both on the left and the right, are saying, "Hey, look, there's enough allegations here, serious enough that we need to look into them and ask questions."
I like Mercedes. She's our former colleague here, known her for years, but I don't know how she could know whether these allegations are true or false. And I think the president is overgeneralizing that the Democrats just want to be obstructionist. I think the Democrats are concerned that while he's an admiral and while he may be a very fine family physician, he lacks the experience necessary to tame a beast, which is what the VA is, of 360,000 bureaucrats.
Yeah.
Now, if that's the case, he should be rejected for that reason, not because of these allegations, whether they're true or untrue.
It's interesting, though. It's almost when you heard the president talking yesterday on multiple occasions about this, that he sort of did leave the door open or gave him an out, if you will. You wonder if he might actually choose to walk away.
Well, I mean, it would be very hard. I would have to say myself, if the president called and asked a member of my family to go serve in some position, it would be very hard to accept that at this point, given what everybody's going through. I mean, it does look like it's a pretty impossible process. At the same time, it's really frustrating to me from a business perspective to see that we've made no headway on the VA. I mean, it's a huge problem. It is so essential to our nation. You know, these are our service men and women who deserve the best care. And I can't believe that we can't even get the right head in place to get started on fixing it, when fixing it's going to be such an enormous job.
You know what's interesting? I just wrote that down, business, because we don't often talk about it that way. We talk about it in terms of our heart, but it is a huge component of our economy. And getting it right, of course, then that heart component comes in, and we want to get it right because of what these men and women do for our country. At the same time, though, you know, there are a lot of questions about the Admiral Ronnie Jackson today that have to do with what he said yesterday. I mean, first he indicated he didn't know about an IG report, and then the White House produced it.
He must have known about it. It was
and
about
then the
him.
White House produced it.
Of course.
And then the second thing was we had on Jerry Moran of Kansas yesterday. Senator Moran told me, yeah, you know, I just sat down with Ronnie Jackson and I asked him all about the allegations, and there were certain things that were said in that conversation too. There were reports about the specifics of the allegations. So I'm not sure if you get on the record later and some of the stuff turns out to be true. He sat down with senators and had these conversations.
Is this a
That's
Democrat?
problematic.
Is this a Democrat or Republican issue?
No. And that's why you saw the hearing. He was supposed to have a committee hearing today, and the Republican chair of the committee pulled that down because he said they were concerned about things they'd heard in private meetings. They were hearing from constituents, from people who'd served with him, that said, we have serious concerns. You heard John Tester in that interview said, we didn't go seeking this out.
If these
People
concerns are
came
so
to
blatant, then going back to President Obama's glowing praise of him.
Well, I'm not sure President Obama would have had full information if he had been like drunk on an overseas trip. I'm not sure that would have reached the president, quite frankly.
Which is sad in its own right.
Well, and Donald Trump clearly hadn't heard any of these allegations either.
Again, sad.
When he decided to nominate him for a cabinet position. I know Donald Trump does things differently, and a lot of people like that. Vetting of cabinet nominees, particularly this one, to Melissa's point, it's so important. It's so vital. It should have been a process where every T was crossed, every I was dotted. They should have at least known about this. They looked
Hold on,
flat-footed.
these are allegations, first of all.
But they're
working
clearly
off the premise that these are all
But they're
true.
clearly out there. And when you vet a cabinet nominee, it's your job to know about the allegations before you nominate.
Well, and look with the White House staff for Rob Porter, that the calls, because the allegations against him were so strong, should there have been an investigation? Should he have been set aside? And that job is nothing like
the VA.
Like this job.
Have you looked at the text of the IG report, though? I mean, it goes into kind of
It actually
the
praises
toxic,
him at the end.
Yeah, the toxic work environment, and it talks about the conflict between the two doctors at the top. I mean, it's sort of a different.
But it doesn't address It doesn't address the drinking.
Sell the VA.
No, it doesn't even talk about that.
Here's what I say:
So
sell the
that wasn't
VA
in the
real
AG
estate.
report. How would they know that?
Sell the VA real estate. Give every veteran a card. Let them go to any hospital or healthcare facility they want.
I agree with that.
Real quick, Mark Thiessen, I spoke to him this morning. He put out an op-ed. It's on FoxNews.com. The VA, making the case for Ronnie Jackson, said the VA desperately needs a combat medic, not a management guru.
Interesting
It's a really interesting piece.
Well, we'll see.
Meanwhile, amid growing questions over fired FBI Director James Comey's actions, we are learning that the Professor Comey gave permission to leak his memos to the press was a special government employee. We'll have the details on that. Plus, new concerns for Republicans over their candidate's narrow win. In last night's special House election in a district, President Trump won by more than 20 points. Does it show red districts could be in play in the midterms? We will debate.
Every day I wake up and I think, who knows what's going to happen, not only through the day, but in the next hour. We're 24/7 news, but we're really down to the minute. So our job is to cut through the talking points, no matter the party, no matter the ideology, to try to get the bottom line truth of the day. You take a deep breath, you realize you're in the moment, and do your job.
Questions about last night's closely watched Arizona special House election. Republican Debbie Lesko defeating Democrat Hural Teperneni in that Phoenix area district to replace former GOP Congressman Trent Franks. He resigned last December amid a sexual harassment allegation. Lesko won by 6 points in a district President Trump carried by more than 20 points. That's raising concern among Republicans that more red districts could be in play in the midterms. Here's Lesko last night.
I'm just really thankful that I won. Would it be nice if I had won by more? Of course. But a win is a win, and I'm the next Congresswoman for Congressional District 8, and that's awesome.
But Teperneni suggesting that despite the loss, the results show Democrats are still fired up.
Our race has really received a lot of attention lately from all around the country. And you got to wonder why. The fact that it's a few points as opposed to double digits, that's because of all of you.
Dr. Teperneni there. Meantime, President Trump today tweeting, quote, congratulations to Republican Debbie Lesko on her big win in the special election for Arizona House seat. Debbie will do a great job. Press is so silent.
All right, this is April. Aren't they going to be running against each other in November? Just yes. Like that Pennsylvania seat that we just watched a few months ago? I mean, this is for a very, very short term. Right. And at that time, there'll be people running for the Senate at the head of the ticket.
Melissa, what can we conclude from this race? 6 points she won over. Donald Trump carried this by over 20. So what does that tell us?
I think that every district and candidate is a unique thing, that it's just not possible to extrapolate out. I mean, I do think that there is a lot of energy on both sides, that everybody is fired up by all of, all the fighting that's going on all over the place. But in each district, it's a different makeup. And especially when you have just two people in the race, you could both lean towards what that district is more like. I mean, I think that tells you how to play those small individual races in the fall and doesn't say anything about bigger races.
It got pretty close there. I spoke to Lesko a couple days ago, and she had a really narrow lead for some time over the Democrat. I think it came down to just a point lead. But what are you able to conclude from this?
Well, what's interesting is when these races tighten in districts where they haven't been close, Republican outside groups and national groups have to spend more money in what should be safe seats. So we've seen this also in the conversation about Texas. Ted Cruz is probably going to win a pretty safe Texas Senate seat, but he has a really well-funded Democratic challenger. So the Republicans are having to spend money in places that they shouldn't have to. They'd rather spend the money in really close, difficult races for Democrats. But you only have a finite amount of money. And so Republicans that I've spoken to are concerned that they're having to spend money to defend seats. Well, Donald Trump won by over 20 points.
Are the Democrats in Arizona happy this morning that it was just 6 points, or are they disappointed that the doctor lost?
Well, both, actually, probably.
Well, Miss Money is sitting next to you, and she seems to not be concerned about the money.
I'm not concerned about the money, because I just think that President Trump is a money-raising machine, that he has proven, he goes out and he is really able to rake in dollars for the Republicans like we haven't seen in a while. So I don't think on the Republican side yes, they are having to spend money, but they're also raising money.
But they're worried about it because Democrats are also raising a ton of money, and they're outraising Republican candidates in a lot of swing districts. And Republicans are worried that they have to defend places Donald Trump won by this much. If every House district, or even half of them, flips by the amount that the Democrat flipped it in Arizona, Democrats take the House.
Harris?
Wow.
The national message that you're talking about actually benefits the Democrats, because they are doing that dance of figuring out what works in each individual market more so. Republicans seem to be looking at that. Well, what can, yoking ourselves to the current administration do for winning on the ground? And that
doesn't work.
It becomes more complicated in the long run, and they may have to make an adjustment, Republicans, and they may very well do that. But Democrats are already making that. Now, where the Democrats are failing is that then that doesn't force them to come up with a national message. And we all know what it should be. It should be the economy. But they still aren't at that level yet. So sooner or later it will even out. And the question is, Will the midterms get here before or after that?
Oh, I have no idea. Well, speaking of the midterms, we're less than 2 weeks away from the West Virginia Republican Senate primary. A new Fox poll shows 3 candidates taking the top tier among likely GOP voters. Congressman Evan Jenkins at 25%, State Attorney General Patrick Morrisey at 21%, and businessman Don Blankenship at 16%. The candidates will face off in the May 8th primary for the chance to try and unseat Democratic Senator Joe Manchin in November. In a debate earlier this week, the candidates tended to align themselves with President Trump while slamming Manchin and taking shots at each other.
Evan Jenkins was a lifelong career Democrat for 20 years, and Evan Jenkins supported Nancy Pelosi. He supported John Kerry, rallied for Hillary Clinton, and it's really just gone religion with respect to conservative values.
I have to respond. You know, here's a guy again, grew up in New Jersey. He ran for Congress in the year 2000 on his Jersey values platform. He has been writing checks to pro-abortion candidates all his life. He doesn't get religion until he came to West Virginia.
Unfortunately, I need to apologize to the public that I created both of these Republicans in West Virginia by making it popular to be a Republican in West Virginia long before one of them moved from being a Democrat and the other one moved here from New Jersey.
Wow. I think the biggest slam was the Jersey part.
I think it was.
That was a pretty good comeback.
There are some fireworks there. Fox News polling shows that 67% of GOP primary voters in West Virginia strongly approve of President Trump's job performance. Okay, that got pretty heated there.
I got to tell you, I know
funny.
Patrick Morrisey because he is a lawyer from New Jersey who tried cases in front of me in
funny.
New Jersey. And when he ended up as the Attorney General of West Virginia, I went, what?
How'd that happen?
A guy
It
from
works for
Jersey,
him.
it does work for him. Why do the Democrats want to get rid of why do the Republicans want to get rid of their favorite Democrat? I mean, Joe Manchin votes with the
I don't think they
Republicans
want to.
more than some Republicans do.
Yeah, I don't think they want to.
Yeah,
No, I think they want to adopt him and give him a nice, cozy home.
So what do we think is going to happen in the primary? Do we think that because Don Blankenship has long been a very polarizing figure in West Virginia. He went to jail actually after a really tragic coal mining
He went
incident.
to jail for manslaughter after people died
exactly.
in that
He'll be joining
mine
me on
accident.
America's Newsroom tomorrow morning.
He's going to be on with you tomorrow?
Yes, and let me tell you something about this race that's fascinating. The undecided voter. 24% of GOP primary voters are undecided in this race. In addition to those that are currently supporting someone, 41% of those said that they'd be willing to change their mind.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, throw that into the bin of undecided. And I mean, that leaves a very fluid
Brett
race.
and Martha are
May 1st?
Next week.
Tuesday, May 1st.
Yeah.
Can we go back to the Joe Manchin question for a second? Because I think Republicans would rather keep Joe Manchin and get rid of Susan Collins. I think if they had
I actually agree with
That's
that.
what I'm saying. I mean, I think they want to adopt him and give him a warm home.
And there are other people they would vote off the planet first.
To Sandra's point about Blankenship, I think the National Republican Party would prefer Joe Manchin to
Absolutely.
Blankenship's almost a Roy
That's
Moore
a great
because
point.
He's so incendiary.
That's right. Well, and you've seen Republican national groups running ads against Blankenship, which is actually stunning in a primary to run an ad against the guy who's polling third. I think because he has such name recognition, for good or for ill, they're concerned about him.
Interesting. Yeah. That's an interesting point, though, for good or for ill. Because we are a nation of let's move on to the next square.
Right.
That's how we progress. Which means that name recognition may trump anything else.
We'll see.
Potentially. We'll see.
But Joe Manchin is a really interesting Democrat. As you said, he is very in tune with his state. When you talk to him, which I've done many times about policies, his guiding principle is what do my constituents want? Not what does the National Party want, not does...
Is that what it's supposed to be, my lord?
I mean, that's why people go to the polls.
Guys, most members of Congress don't say that. They think about what Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan or Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer wants.
Wow.
So it's actually refreshing when you talk to a politician like Joe Manchin.
You know, you are a former spokesperson for these people. Is this sort of true confessions?
I don't know.
That's why she's with us.
Some real talk on the couch.
That's why she's with us, giving us that behind-the-scenes look.
But it's interesting. We've talked a lot about Democratic primaries. This is a really contested Republican primary. And to Sandra's point, that kind of undecided makes polls right now really iffy.
But that number of being willing to switch north of 40, I mean, that's basically, like, you wouldn't go to the altar like
With
that.
a week to go.
Right? I mean, yeah, I'm going to the altar with my guy, and 40% of him wants to switch partners. Don't buy the cake.
Those aren't good odds. As we mentioned here, Fox News is America's election headquarters. Be sure to catch that West Virginia GOP Senate primary debate, moderated by our own Brett Barron, Martha McCallum, next Tuesday night, May 1st at 6:30 Eastern. Coming up, a Republican-appointed judge ruling against the Trump administration's attempts to kill DACA and becoming the first judge to threaten to order its restoration. All this as a caravan of migrants arrives at the U.S. border despite warnings from the Trump administration to stay away. How much of a setback this is for the White House, coming up next.
They deserve to have the right to asylum, and we as a country should be meeting them with open arms instead of with the National Guard and with more guns at the border.
A third federal judge rejecting the Trump administration's justification for ending the so-called Dreamers program. That's the Obama-era program that protected illegal immigrants from deportation. 2 district court judges appointed by President Bill Clinton came to similar conclusions in the past, but this is the first Republican-appointed judge to do so. Judge John Bates writing, "For the reasons that follow, the court concludes that it has both the jurisdiction and the statutory authority to hear plaintiffs' APA or Administrative Procedure Act and constitutional claims. The court further concludes that under the APA, DACA's rescission was arbitrary and capricious because the department failed adequately to explain its conclusion that the program was unlawful. And unlike previous judges, Bates just opened the possibility that the Trump administration could be ordered to take new DACA applications. He said in his decision, if Homeland Security doesn't come up with a new, better explanation for dismantling it within 90 days, the entire program would be restored. All this playing out as that migrant caravan traveling through Mexico arrived at the U.S. border, despite Trump administration warnings to stay away. Judge, I will start with you on the legality.
Okay, so there's 3 judicial rulings on DACA. DACA is the program that prevents infants who came here at the hands of their parents, no choice of their own, who've grown into young adulthood from being deported, provided they do a half dozen things that are in President Obama and Janet Napolitano's, no relation, executive.
Why do you look at me when you say that? I'm not confused.
I know. Executive order. So the first 2 judges ruled differently from this judge, and they said you can't kick anybody off the program that's on it, but you don't have to put any new people on it. This judge said you have to admit all people to the program who comply with the Obama-era regulations.
Right.
So he is effectively saying a discretionary...
Doubling down.
Yes, a discretionary policy decision made by President Obama is binding on President Trump. In my opinion, that is new and radical. I am a supporter of DACA because I think compassion is the best way to treat these people who came here as babies. But the reason given by this judge would force a new president to accept the decisions of his predecessor, even when he ran against it.
So is that political?
In my opinion, it is. But this is a long way from
so
the
how do you,
if you're the
White House, do you try to block that based on the politics?
But what happens next? Can they appeal it?
Yes,
right, based on politics.
He gave them 90 days to appeal, which candidly most judges don't do. He realized it was going to be appealed either way. So they don't have to take these new applicants now. They have 90 days. I don't think the appeal will be finished in 90 days, but it will be filed.
Right. What's interesting to me is this, and sad, is this week we saw the first DACA recipient who was still here under a currently legal DACA documentation was deported to Mexico. So he didn't have his wallet with him. It was in the car, and he had it in the car, and they deported him. There's been a lot of reporting on it. And so
he got deported because his wallet wasn't with him?
He was in a restaurant. His wallet with his documentation was in the car, at least according to the press reports, and he was deported back to Mexico. This is the problem now. These are real humans' lives. Yes, we have laws, and yes, we have a judicial process that is playing out and will continue to play out.
You know who tried to solve it? The man on the big wall over there, the President of the United States. Yeah,
Well, he could solve
if
it
they
if he can
show
come
it,
up with
you'll
a deal
see
with the
it.
Democrats.
And so my question is, why didn't the Democrats step in and work with this president?
They tried to, but quite frankly, the Republican caucus is split on how to fix DACA. Some of them don't like amnesty. Some of them don't like what President Trump proposed. And President Trump, everybody keeps changing
If I don't
their
respond to that,
minds on this.
Melissa is.
Yeah, well, this is what I was going to say. You know what the answer to all of that is? Because I agree with what you said. I agree with what you said. The answer is an exploding deadline. And that's what the president tried to do. As with all business and all negotiations, when these parties are so deeply entrenched and everyone's so deeply entrenched in their constituents and the politics and what they're supposed to do.
Why didn't the Democrats step up? They shut the government down.
Why didn't I felt the judge originally who put it back in place, because when the president ripped the Band-Aid off and said DACA's gone, that forced everyone, in theory, to come to the table and work something out and make some sort of deal. But the judge that came in and said, we're going to put it back in place, took away the exploding deadline.
Well, and actually, it wasn't even on that judge's docket until June. So we actually got to see it moved up to late April.
It is the problem when you have the same case being decided by 3 different judges. It should have all been consolidated before one judge, one appellate court, and then the
Democrats
Supreme Court
today could go to the president, could go to Republicans on Hill with an idea. Yeah, they could do it right now.
I don't think Republicans would say yes.
Okay, Fox News now confirming stunning new details about the law professor that James Comey used to leak his conversations with President Trump. Why this is raising alarm?
More Outnumbered in just a moment. But first, let's go to Harris and what is coming up on Outnumbered Overtime in a few minutes. Hey, Harris.
A very busy hour. The Trump administration defending the president's embattled nominee to head Veterans Affairs, White House Dr. Ronnie Jackson. And guess who else was a big fan of his? President Obama. GOP Congressman Mike Kaufman of the Veterans Affairs Committee joins me to talk about the newly revealed allegations against Dr. Jackson. And has the French president succeeded in getting our president to stick with the Iran nuclear deal, or to come up with a new deal? Top Democrat Senator Ben Cardin of the Foreign Affairs Committee joins me to talk about all that. Atop the hour overtime. Sandra?
Oh, we'll be watching. Thank you, Harris. Meanwhile, new questions for former FBI Director James Comey. Fox News has learned that the Columbia University law professor who gave Comey's memos to the media previously worked as a special government employee for Comey's FBI on an unpaid basis. According to sources familiar with the situation, Comey tasked Richmond with special projects, and he had security clearance and access to the building. Also, Richmond was provided talking points detailing how the agency was managing the investigation into former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's emails. And now Republicans in Congress want answers. Rightly so, Judge?
Yes. And it appeared when the memos were released. These are the 7 memos that Jim Comey wrote about his interactions with the president, some of which had blacked out. That turns out that they had classified materials in them. And I owe Jim Comey an apology, because I said if this stuff had classified materials in it and he gave it to the professor, that is a crime, to fail to secure state secrets if they were properly classified. Now it turns out that the professor had a security clearance. So there was no crime, Mr. Comey, and I apologize. I was wrong. The professor had a security clearance as a former federal prosecutor and as a special employee of the FBI. He was cleared to receive those documents with the classified material in them that Jim Comey gave it to them.
And leak them?
That's a problem for the professor. But it's not a problem.
Some members of Congress are weighing in. Rep. Mark Meadows, chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, released a statement to Fox News saying it's certainly interesting that Director Comey would offer a special job and give full access to his friend when there are 35,000 employees at the FBI.
Every government agency has what's called special government employees, SGEs. I don't know why it's that term. It's fairly routine. I'm sure Mark Meadows is really concerned about this. This is political, that he's raising attention to this. There's no evidence that this has anything to do with anything related to the Hillary investigation. What's interesting about the leaks to the press is reportedly this professor read excerpts to a reporter. He did not hand them over. And so it will be interesting to see if he purposefully avoided getting into classified information when he did that.
It's been interesting, he went on to say, and it isn't just that he gave these memos to a friend, he gave them to another FBI employee he had handpicked to act as a special government employee of the FBI. He finishes by saying the question becomes, how many other people did he give these memos to?
See, I think Comey is covers all his bases and is very clever about politically leaking what he wants to through someone else, through another channel. It just makes the whole thing, more slimier and more disingenuous.
But the Justice Department and the FBI leak all the time. They will leak against a criminal defendant, so it's difficult to find a juror.
That's terrible.
It is terrible,
yes.
But it's a fact of life. It's wrong, and they only get caught when there's a political uproar. But if the defendant is probably guilty and they're polluting the jury pool against him, no harm, no foul as far as the public is concerned.
And by the way,
the public, I think there's a harm and a foul.
But by the way,
I'm with you, but it's a fact of life.
It's a fact of life. Also, Congress leaked the Comey memos to the public within an hour of receiving them. Now, yes, there were redactions for classified material, but you can't only dislike leaks when they're on the other side politically, but when they help you, man, the public has a right to know.
He said he was leaking it in order to spur a special prosecutor.
And he succeeded.
I mean, that's to a political end.
You know who has a lot of questions to ask? And that is Brett Baer, our very own. He will be sitting down with James Comey tomorrow night on Special Report. We've heard a lot from James Comey lately, but this, this is going to get into...
This is going to be a real interview.
Yeah?
No powder puff. I have that feeling.
All right, so tune in for that. More Outnumbered in just a moment.